30 years. 6 days a week. That is thousands of nights one person stood in a single square foot of this kitchen, and it turns out stone keeps count. In the far corner, pressed into the tile, there's a pale oval, the deepest were in the entire room, carved by 2 feet that simply refuse to leave. I'll tell you exactly whose feet did it, and why no renovation on earth can ever sand that shape back out. But first, you have to meet the hundreds of people who walked right across it without once looking down. Every kitchen has a floor, but this one keeps score. Near the stove the grout is darker, stained by 30 winters of dropped soup. By the door the tile is chipped, dragged raw by 1,000 delivery boxes. And under the pass there's a dip you can feel right through your sneakers, worn by one body pivoting, plate up, plate down, 10,000 times a night. This floor is a diary nobody ever meant to write. Most people never look down. They come in, they sit, they eat, they leave, remembering the food, maybe the smell, maybe the owner's laugh. Nobody remembers the ground they stood on. But the ground remembers them. Every scuff is a Tuesday. Every burn mark is a dinner rush that almost broke somebody. Peel back the rubber mat and you're reading 3 whole decades, written in a language made only of stains. Work a floor for 30 years and it stops being flat. It rises where nobody stands and sinks where somebody always did. And that low, glassy oval in the corner? That's the deepest we're in the entire room. Someone stood there so long, so many nights in a row, they literally reshaped stone with their own 2 feet. Keep that spot in your mind. We're coming back to it. 30 years. Do the math for a second. A place opens 6 days a week, that's more than 9,000 mornings someone unlocked the same door in the dark. 9,000 times the burners clicked on. 9,000 nights the last light went off. That's not a job. It's a life measured in services, lunch, dinner, close, repeat, until the routine wears a groove into you the exact same way it wears one into the floor. The morning starts before the sun. Onions first, always onions, because the broth needs hours it will never get any other way. Then the bread guy knocks. Then the fish. Then the produce truck idling in the alley out back. By the time the first customer pushes the door open, this kitchen has already lived half a day nobody will ever see. That's the deal with this work. The hardest part happens when the room is empty and the lights are only half on. And it repeats. That's what people underestimate, not the difficulty of one shift, but the arithmetic of 10,000 of them stacked end to end. Same cutting board. Same aching wrist. The same ticket printer screaming at 7:15 every single night. You don't get good at this because you're talented. You get good because you did it so many times your hands finally stopped asking your brain for permission at all. But here's where it gets interesting. Somewhere in the middle of those 30 years, the kitchen quietly stopped being about the food. Regulars will tell you the soup is good, and it is, but that's not why they kept coming back for 20 straight years. They came back for something the menu never listed, something built slowly, one night at a time. And it had everything to do with the faces. A kitchen that stays open that long becomes a clock for a whole neighborhood. First dates turn into anniversaries at the same table. A kid who could barely see over the counter comes back at 30 with a kid of his own. You stop being a restaurant and start being a landmark inside people's private histories, the place where the important nights actually happened. That's a strange kind of power for a room with a worn-out floor, hundreds of faces. Think about who actually walks through a neighborhood kitchen over 3 decades. The night shift nurse eating at 2 in the morning because it's the only place still warm. The taxi driver who orders the same thing so often they start cooking it the moment they see his headlights turn the corner. The old man at the two-top who came with his wife for 40 years and now comes alone, and everyone knows not to give away her chair too fast. There's the couple who fought here and made up here at the very same booth. The teenager who got his first job washing these dishes and cried in the walk-in cooler when it got too hard. The regular who vanished for a whole year and came back thinner, quieter, and the cook just said the usual, like no time at all had passed. Which was quietly the kindest thing anyone could have done for him, and that's not even the part that stays with you. Because for every face you remember, there's one you served for years and never once knew the name of. The woman by the window every Sunday. The 2 men who always argued about football. You watched their entire lives in 90-minute pieces, and then one day they simply stopped coming, and you never found out why. A kitchen quietly collects goodbyes it never gets the chance to say. That's the weight nobody warns you about. You're not just cooking. You're holding a piece of a stranger's best night and their worst night, sometimes in the very same week. Multiply that by hundreds of people over 30 years and you're carrying a whole city's worth of small, private history, none of it written down anywhere, all of it stored inside the muscle memory of the people standing behind the pass. And then the world tries to erase it. It always does. First comes the rent letter, the number doubled, no negotiation, no apology. Then the block itself changes, the hardware store becomes a bank, the bakery becomes a phone shop. The regulars move away, or move on, or move into the ground. Slowly the one room that held everyone's memories becomes the last old thing left on a street that doesn't even recognize it anymore. Then came the 2 years the whole world just stopped eating out. Chairs stacked. Dining room dark. A kitchen built to feed a full crowd, now cooking for a handful of takeout bags and the sound of one radio. For a place that measured its entire life in full rooms, an empty room isn't quiet, it's loud. Every single night the lights stayed off was a night that low oval in the floor gathered dust instead of footprints.
Most places don't come back from that. And for a while, this one wasn't going to either. The math didn't work. The owner was tired in a way that sleep does not fix. The for lease sign was already priced out. But here's where it gets really interesting, because what saved this place wasn't a loan, wasn't a viral post, wasn't some rich investor writing in. It was the floor. Or more exactly, the people who couldn't stand to see it paved over. When word got out that the doors might close for good, something happened that nobody planned. The night nurse showed up. The taxi driver showed up. The kid who once cried in the walk-in cooler, now a grown man with gray in his beard, showed up. They didn't come to eat. They came to stand inside that room one more time, and a lot of them stood, without ever knowing it, right on that worn oval in the corner. And that's the thing about a place that spent 30 years giving people a spot to simply be. When it finally needed a spot to stand, the whole neighborhood showed up to be the floor for once. Envelopes slid under the door. A line around the block on the last announced day that turned out not to be the last day at all. You cannot fundraise loyalty like that. It's earned one single plate at a time, over decades. So the lights came back on. New paint, sure. A new sign, maybe. Prices that finally make some kind of sense. But walk to the far corner, kneel back down, and the oval is still right there under the new mat, because you can renovate a room, but you cannot sand out the shape a human life pressed into it. The new cooks stand in it without ever being told to. Their feet find that low spot entirely on their own. That is what nobody could erase. Not the rent, not the empty years, not the changing street, not even time itself. A building is just walls. What actually survived those 30 years is the invisible thing built on top of the floor, hundreds of people, most of whom never met, all belonging to the same small warm room for a little while. So now you know what carved that oval, one person standing at the stove, night after night, for 30 years, the one who stayed while everyone else came and went. That's the mark meaning leaves, and meaning does not wipe off. So tell me, what's the room that shaped you like that, the one you'd show up to save? Alright, that wraps it up. Like, save, subscribe, and we'll dig deeper next time.